Mom, I need you to listen to me carefully. Michael's voice came through the landline, lower than usual, urgent, like a whisper pulled tight with fear. I pressed the receiver closer to my ear, the dish towel still in my hand. The house was quiet except for the sound of running water upstairs, where my daughter-in-law Elena had just stepped into the shower. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "Elena is here. She's upstairs getting ready for the day." The pause on the other end was so long that my stomach knotted. Then Michael said words that made my knees weaken. "That's impossible. I'm standing in the international terminal right now, Mom. I found her passport on the floor near security. I thought it was some mix-up, but then I saw her with my own eyes. She walked straight into the premium lounge with a man in an expensive suit. They're together. They're boarding an international flight." My breath caught. Upstairs I heard the creak of the bathroom pipes, the unmistakable splash of water hitting the tub. Elena had called down only minutes ago, cheerful as ever. "Mom, I'll just take a quick shower before heading out." And yet Michael swore she was across town in the airport, preparing to leave the country with another man. "You must be mistaken," I whispered, my voice trembling. Maybe it was someone who just looked like her. But Michael didn't back down. "Mom, it was her. Same face, same voice, when she laughed at something that man whispered, and her passport was right here in my hand before she went through that gate. How can she be in two places at once?" His question lodged like a thorn in my chest. For a moment, I thought I had lost my senses. I looked toward the staircase, waiting, hoping Elena would call out again, prove Michael wrong, prove me sane. As if on cue, the water stopped running. A door opened upstairs. Then came her voice, clear and familiar, echoing down the hallway. "Mom, who's on the phone?" My heart hammered so loudly I was sure Michael could hear it through the line. My mind split in two. On one end, my son swore he had just seen her at the airport with a stranger. On the other hand, her voice, her presence, right here in my house. I forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to me. "Just a friend," I shouted back and pressed the receiver hard against my ear, whispering to Michael. "She's here right now. I can see her shadow at the top of the stairs." Silence followed, then Michael's voice, clipped and certain. "Mom, look again, because I'm watching her walk to the gate with that man's arm around her. She's not at your house. She's with him." My hand shook so violently I almost dropped the phone. I clutched it to my chest, gasping for air. Upstairs, Elena padded down the hallway. I glimpsed her figure in the mirror by the living room, hair damp, wrapped in a towel, moving as naturally as she had every morning since she married my son. "Mom, I'll be quick," she called, her tone sweet, casual, the way a daughter might reassure a mother. Nothing about her voice carried the weight of secrets. And yet Michael's words thundered in my skull. Two places at once. He had a passport in his hand. A man in an expensive suit. My blood ran cold. What if this wasn't a mistake? What if something darker was unfolding under my very roof? I wanted to run upstairs, fling open the bathroom door, and demand answers. But what would I even ask? "Why are you here?" when my son swears you're boarding a plane? No, I had to keep steady. I had to protect my family, even if I didn't understand what was happening. "Michael, come home as soon as you can," I whispered into the receiver. "We'll figure this out." He exhaled sharply. "I will, Mom. But please, don't ignore this. Something isn't right." The line went dead, leaving me alone with the hum of silence and the thundering of my own heartbeat. I set the phone down with trembling fingers. Elena's footsteps descended the stairs. She appeared in a fresh dress, smiling politely, her damp hair clinging to her cheeks. "I'm going to the market early today, Mom. Do you need anything?" Her voice was soft, her eyes bright, her smile warm, so achingly ordinary that for a moment I wondered if I had dreamed the whole phone call. I forced my lips into a smile. "Just some tomatoes, please." She nodded, grabbed her wicker basket, and stepped out into the morning sunday. The door clicked shut. Only then did I collapse into the armchair, my pulse pounding against my ribs. I stared at the framed family photo on the wall, my late husband beside me, my sons in their youth, and Elena in her wedding gown, radiant, confident. My chest tightened. What if Michael was right? What if the woman who just left my house wasn't the Elena I thought I knew? What if my family, the family I had given everything to preserve, was standing on the edge of a secret that could shatter us all? The wicker basket swung gently at Elena's side as she disappeared down the walkway, her figure shrinking against the glow of the morning Sunday. I remained frozen in the armchair, my hand pressed against my chest as though it could hold back the storm that had been set loose inside me. Michael's voice still rang in my ears. "She's at the airport, Mom." I'm looking right at her. But hadn't I just spoken to her here, under this very roof? My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Mistaken identity, poor lighting, a woman with an uncanny resemblance. Yet deep down, a sharp unease whispered that the truth was not so simple. When I finally stood, my legs trembled. The house felt different, as if its walls had grown too narrow, its familiar corners now harboring shadows I had never noticed. I walked into the kitchen and found the dish towel I had dropped earlier, still damp from wiping breakfast plates. I picked it up, then set it down again, unable to focus. Small details, ones I had dismissed before, crowded back into memory. Last week, Elena came home from work later than usual, claiming she had stayed behind to help a colleague finish paperwork. But her hair had been styled differently, curled at the ends, something she never did. And the blouse she wore, a navy satin, was not one I had seen in her closet before. I had admired her sense of thriftiness. She rarely bought new clothes. I told myself she must have borrowed it from a friend, but she had avoided my eyes when I asked about it. A day later, she snapped at Ethan for spilling milk, though she usually doted on him with endless patience. I had chalked it up to fatigue, the natural mood swings of a young mother. But now, every memory returned sharpened, suspicious, undeniable. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with my notebook, the same one I had once used to record recipes and reminders. I turned to a blank page and wrote the date at the top, my hand shaking. 10:15 a.m. Elena leaves for the market with a wicker basket. Normal mood. Hair damp. Dressed in pale blue. The ink bled slightly as I pressed harder than I meant to. Why was I doing this? Because I could no longer trust myself to remember, because my mind felt like a shifting tide pulling me in different directions. If I wrote it down, the facts would stay still, fixed in black and white. The sound of Ethan's laughter drew me back inside. He was sprawled on the living room rug, crayons scattered around him, sketching a messy rainbow. "Grandma, look," he chirped, his eyes bright. "Mom helped me with my letters yesterday. Her handwriting was so pretty." He flipped the page to show neat, carefully formed words. Then he frowned and pointed to today's page. But this morning she used her other hand, and it was ugly. I looked closely. The first page bore tidy right-handed strokes. The second page, written with the left hand, was jagged and uneven. My stomach lurched. "Maybe she was tired, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. But Ethan tilted his head with innocent curiosity. "Grandma, sometimes she hugs me really tight, and sometimes she doesn't even look at me. Why does she change so much?" His words pierced me more deeply than Michael's phone call. Out of the mouths of children comes the truth adults try to ignore. I kissed his forehead and sent him off to wash up, but my hands were cold, trembling with unease. Later, as I watered the flower beds in the backyard, our neighbor Helen strolled over with a plate in hand. "Evelyn, your daughter-in-law made such a nice casserole yesterday," she said, smiling. Then she lowered her voice, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "But wasn't it strange? She handed me the dish with her left hand. I thought you once told me she was right-handed." My throat tightened. "Maybe she uses both," I managed, laughing weakly. Helen shrugged, unconvinced, and handed me the empty plate. After she left, I stood alone in the yard, gripping the dish so tightly I thought it might shatter. Small details, insignificant on their own, were stacking like bricks in a wall that separated the Elena I thought I knew from the woman I now feared she might be. Evening fell heavy and slow. When Elena returned from the market, her basket held tomatoes, cilantro, and fresh fish. She placed it on the counter, smiling warmly. "Mom, I'll make that roasted fish you like tonight. Does that sound good?" I nodded, forcing cheer, though my throat was dry. At dinner, Daniel arrived home weary from work, but still eager to hear Ethan chatter about his drawings. Elena served the fish delicately, her manners so graceful, so practiced, that for a moment I almost believed Michael had been wrong. Almost. Then, as I watched her pour water into a glass, I noticed again her left hand steady, her right hand idle. Daniel didn't seem to notice, lost in conversation with Ethan. but I couldn't tear my gaze away. The woman across the table looked like my daughter-in-law, sounded like her, and moved like her, yet in some small, unmistakable way, she was not. That night, after clearing the dishes and tucking Ethan into bed, I sat at the dining table alone. I opened my notebook again. 6:30 p.m. dinner. Elena in a pale blue dress. Used the left hand to pour water. Mood cheerful. I stared at the words until they blurred, my chest aching. What was I really writing? A diary of a family dinner or a record of deception unraveling before my eyes? Upstairs, Daniel and Elena murmured in their room. I could not make out their words, only the rhythm of their voices, sometimes calm, sometimes sharp. I closed my notebook, slid it back into the drawer, and whispered to myself, I have to know the truth, before it's too late. The next morning dawned clear, the sun spilling gold across the front lawn, but inside me, the weight of doubt had only thickened. I moved through the kitchen in silence, the clatter of dishes too loud against the quiet house. Daniel had already left for work, his briefcase in hand, promising to be home late after a site inspection. Ethan was outside waiting for the school bus, his backpack bouncing as he ran circles in the driveway. Elena floated down the stairs in a cream blouse and neatly pressed slacks, her hair tied back in a ponytail. She greeted me with a smile so radiant, it almost felt staged, as though she knew I was watching her too closely. I'll pick up Ethan this afternoon, she said, slipping her purse over her shoulder. Don't worry, Mom, I've got it. I nodded, but my pen was already itching for my notebook. 8 a.m. Elena leaves for errands, dressed in a cream blouse, mood bright. Said she would pick Ethan up later. The words steadied me, though they filled me with unease. Around mid-morning, I carried a basket of laundry to the porch, trying to distract myself with ordinary chores. That was when Helen, my neighbor, called across the hedge. Evelyn, do you have a moment? She walked over, holding a watering can, her brow creased. Yesterday at the store, I waved at Elena, but she looked right through me. Didn't even nod. I forced a laugh. She must have been distracted. Helen frowned. But later, just an hour afterward, she came back again. This time all smiles, asking about my roses. I thought it was odd, almost like she was a different person. The watering can gleamed in her hand, droplets running down its side. I stared, unable to answer, my pulse pounding. When she left, I added to the notebook, my script sharp and shaky. Neighbors saw 2 different moods within hours. Cold in the morning, warm in the afternoon. In the afternoon, I stopped by the local diner for coffee with Linda, my dearest friend since college. She took one look at me and put her hand over mine. Evelyn, something's eating at you. Tell me. The smell of frying bacon and strong coffee hung in the air, but suddenly I felt like I couldn't breathe. I told her everything in broken fragments, Michael's call from the airport, Elena's voice in my house at the same time, the handwriting differences, the neighbor's remark. Linda listened without interruption, her face growing more grave by the minute. You can't ignore this, she said firmly. Your gut is trying to protect you. Write everything down, keep watching. Secrets have a way of coming to light if you don't turn away. Her words struck me like both comfort and warning. I pulled the notebook from my purse and slid it across the table. She flipped through the pages, nodding, then looked up with eyes full of resolve. This is evidence, Evelyn. Don't dismiss it as imagination. On the way home, I stopped by the bakery for Ethan's favorite pastries. Mr. Collins behind the counter beamed. Your daughter-in-law was just in here this morning. Such a polite lady, said the bread was the best she'd ever had. He chuckled, then added, funny thing, though she came back again not 2 hours later, scowling like she'd fought with someone. Barely said thank you. My stomach twisted, and I gripped the edge of the counter. She must have been tired, I murmured, paying quickly. But inside, I knew it was another brick in the wall of doubt. By evening, the house filled again with the clamor of family. Daniel returned late, exhausted, his face lined with worry. Ethan chattered happily about a drawing project at school. Elena served dinner, her hands steady, her laughter easy. To anyone else, it might have looked like an ordinary night. But as I watched her cut vegetables, I saw her switch the knife from right hand to left without hesitation, then back again as though testing me. My heart pounded. Did she know I was noticing? Did she sense I was recording everything? I lowered my gaze to my plate, but my mind raced. Later, after Ethan went to bed, Daniel sank into the couch beside me, rubbing his temples. "Mom, I think Elena's been stressed. She's been different lately. Have you noticed?" My breath caught. He had noticed too, but he shook his head quickly, as though brushing it aside. "Work has been hard. She's probably just tired." I wanted to tell him everything, to show him the notebook, but fear held my tongue. What if I was wrong? What if speaking aloud shattered the fragile peace of this house? So I only nodded, forcing a smile. Yes, maybe she's tired. When the house finally fell quiet, I sat alone in the kitchen, the notebook open before me. I added the day's final entry, spoke to Linda. The bakery owner noticed 2 visits, opposite moods. Daniel has noticed changes too. I stared at the page until the words blurred, tears prickling my eyes. The woman in the next room, laughing softly with my son, might be Elena, or she might not. And if she wasn't, then who exactly had I welcomed into my home? The days blurred together, each one carrying a heavier weight than the last. I moved through the motions of breakfast and laundry, of checking Ethan's homework and watering the garden, but my mind was never still. The notebook grew thicker, its pages filled with times, outfits, moods, all the tiny contradictions that circled around Elena like gnats I couldn't swat away. Each night, after the house fell silent, I sat under the dim kitchen light, pen in hand, wondering if I was slowly losing my grip on reality or inching closer to the truth. One Saturday morning I told myself I needed rest, that I should stop writing for a day. But as soon as Elena announced she was going to the market, the old urgency returned. I waited until she left the house, her red basket swinging at her side, then pressed the notebook open again, 10:05 a.m. Elena leaves, red basket, light mood. I set the pen down but kept my eyes fixed on the clock. The minutes crawled. At noon, she had not returned. By 1, my palms were damp with sweat. When the gate finally creaked open near 3, Elena stepped inside, smiling as if nothing had happened, but the basket was blue, not red. "What happened to the other one?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She glanced down, hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then smiled brightly. "It broke, Mom. A friend lent me this one." She set it on the counter and began unpacking tomatoes and herbs, as if that single detail meant nothing. I scribbled in the notebook with shaking hands. "Returned with blue basket." Said the red one broke. Voice hurried. That night at dinner, Ethan spilled a cup of water, the liquid spreading across the tablecloth. "It's okay, honey," I said quickly, reaching for a rag. But Elena's face twisted, her voice rising. "Why are you so careless, Ethan? Can't you be more careful?" My grandson's eyes filled with tears. Daniel frowned, putting a hand on her arm. "It was an accident, Elena." She jerked away, her tone sharp. "You always defend him and make me the bad one." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Ethan's sniffles. My heart squeezed. Just a few days ago she had been sweet, singing him to sleep. Now she looked like a stranger, her eyes cold and hard. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I wrote furiously. Dinner angry at Ethan, defensive with Daniel. Another shift, cannot ignore anymore. The following afternoon I told myself I needed proof beyond words on paper. I needed to see where she really went when she left with that basket. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Daniel was at work, Ethan was at a friend's birthday party, and the house was quiet except for the creak of floorboards under my feet. Elena came downstairs in a pale yellow dress, her basket swinging casually. "I'll just go to the market, Mom. Back soon." She kissed my cheek, her smile gentle, her eyes unreadable. The door closed and I stood frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. A voice inside me whispered, "Follow her." I grabbed my old shawl from the coat rack, draped it over my shoulders, and slipped outside. The summer air was heavy, the sun scorching, but I stayed far enough behind her to remain unseen. My sandals crunched softly on the sidewalk as I kept to the shadows of trees and fences. She walked briskly toward the corner. Then, instead of turning right toward the market as always, she veered left into a narrow side street. My stomach flipped. I slowed my pace, ducking behind parked cars. The neighborhood grew older, rougher, peeling paint, sagging porches, weeds pushing through cracked pavement. She didn't look back. She just kept walking until she disappeared into a dim alley behind a mechanic's shop. I crept closer, hiding behind a stack of old bicycles leaning against a fence. My breath came fast, my palms damp. Ahead, Elena stopped before a weathered wooden door, glanced around quickly, then knocked. A moment later the door opened, and she slipped inside. The door shut again, leaving me staring at the chipped paint, my knees trembling. I wanted to rush forward, demand to know what she was hiding, but my feet were heavy as stone. Fear pinned me in place. What if the truth I uncovered destroyed everything? I backed away slowly, my heart racing, and hurried home with each step heavier than the last. When I pushed open the gate, the sound of chopping reached my ears. I froze. Elena was standing in the kitchen, wearing a white blouse, slicing vegetables calmly as though she had been there all afternoon. She looked up at me, her eyes cool, her voice sharp. "Where did you go, Mom? You're only just getting back." My lips parted, but no words came. Only moments ago, I had seen her slip into that alley in a yellow dress, and now she stood here in white, her face unreadable. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I just went for a walk." She nodded, but her gaze lingered on me, cold enough to make me shiver. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the shadows of tree branches flickering across my bedroom walls. Every detail replayed in my mind: the yellow dress vanishing into the alley, the white blouse waiting for me in the kitchen, her eyes watching me like she knew I was watching her. I pressed my hand against the drawer, where my notebook lay hidden, and whispered into the darkness, "Something is terribly wrong." Morning light streamed through the curtains, but it brought me no comfort. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the family photo on the wall, the one where Daniel and Elena smiled on their wedding day, Ethan cradled in their arms. That photo had always been my anchor, a reminder of love and continuity. Now it felt like a cruel joke, mocking the confusion that gnawed at me. I reached for my notebook and flipped to the latest page. My handwriting from last night slanted crooked across the lines: followed Elena, yellow dress, entered alley, returned home instantly in a white blouse. Impossible. I traced the words with my fingertip, my chest heavy. I wasn't imagining this. I couldn't be. The sound of small footsteps broke my thoughts. Ethan shuffled in, his hair sticking up in every direction, rubbing his eyes. He smiled when he saw me. "Grandma, guess what? Last night, Mom sang me a song before bed, the one you always sing." His innocent voice lilted with excitement. My breath caught. "Which song, sweetheart?" He beamed. "Cielito Lindo. She said she learned it from you." My heart dropped into my stomach. Elena had never sung that song in this house, not once. I had sung it countless times to soothe Ethan, yes, but never had she joined in, and yet my grandson swore she had, her voice gentle and familiar. I forced a smile, patting his head, but my hands shook. "That's nice, honey." He nodded, already reaching for his cereal, blissfully unaware of the storm his words had unleashed in me. Later that day, I ventured across the street to return a dish to Helen. She opened her door, wiping her hands on a towel. "Evelyn, I wanted to ask, has your daughter-in-law been all right?" Yesterday she walked by twice. The first time she was bright, chatting about the weather. Then, only an hour later, she passed again. Same basket, same clothes, but her face was like stone. She didn't even say hello. I forced a laugh that sounded brittle. "She's been under stress." Helen tilted her head, unconvinced. "Well, I just thought it was unusual, like two different women." Her words echoed in my skull as I walked back home, clutching the dish to my chest. Two different women. That phrase rang like a bell I could no longer ignore. By evening, I was wound so tightly that even the smallest things set my nerves on edge. At dinner, Elena served stew with her usual grace, smiling at Daniel, asking about his day. But when Ethan accidentally dropped his spoon, she stiffened, her eyes flashing. "Why are you so clumsy?" she snapped. The boy shrank back, tears pooling in his eyes. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Elena, it's just a spoon." She shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. The warmth at the table dissolved into silence, broken only by the scrape of cutlery. I swallowed hard, my throat aching. This wasn't the Elena who had baked cookies with Ethan last week, laughing with flour on her cheeks. This was someone colder, harsher, alien. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. My notebook lay heavy in the drawer beside me, its pages filled with contradictions, each entry darker than the last. Finally, near midnight, I slipped out of bed, pulled on my shawl, and sat at the kitchen table under the dim light. I opened the notebook and wrote, "Pattern clear. Some days Elena is warm. Other days, harsh. Some days right-handed, others left-handed. Seen twice in one day by neighbors. Seen in two places at once. Must be more than mood swings. Must be something else." My hand trembled as I pressed the pen harder. Not one Elena. Two. The words stared back at me, black and undeniable. I pressed my palms against the table, my breath ragged. Could it be true? Could there really be two women? One living in my home, the other vanishing into alleys, appearing at the airport, smiling at strangers? The idea sounded insane, but it explained everything. And once I let it take root, I couldn't shake it. The following afternoon, my suspicion sharpened to obsession. Elena announced she was going to the market again, her basket slung casually on her arm. I waited until she disappeared down the street before slipping out behind her, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This time, I kept closer, darting behind parked cars and hedges. She turned left again, heading toward that same neglected part of town. The houses sagged with peeling paint, the sidewalks cracked and uneven. She walked with purpose, never looking back, until she vanished once more into the narrow alley. I crept forward, pressing myself against the wall, peering around the corner. The door at the end of the alley stood ajar, revealing a dim interior lit by a single bulb. For a moment, I saw her silhouette inside, moving quickly, as if shedding the weight of the woman she pretended to be. My pulse hammered in my ears. This was no errand to the market. This was something else, something hidden. I raised my hand to knock, to demand answers, but froze. My courage faltered. What if I wasn't ready for the truth? What if opening that door tore my family apart forever? My hand dropped. I stumbled backward, retreating down the alley, shame and fear burning in my chest. By the time I returned home, Elena was in the kitchen again, dressed differently, her smile practiced. "You're back late, Mom," she said lightly. "I made tea." Her eyes lingered on me too long, as though she could read the panic in my face. I forced a nod, retreating to my room. That night, I wrote the final line of the day with a heavy heart. I am certain now, there are two Elenas, and I must find the second one. The decision came to me like a whisper in the dark. I couldn't live another day trapped between suspicion and silence. The notebook had grown thick with contradictions, my hands stained with ink from nights of frantic scribbling, but words on paper weren't enough. I needed to see her, to look her in the eye, to know for certain what kind of truth was hiding behind that weathered wooden door at the end of the alley. So the next morning, when Elena breezed out with her basket and her bright smile, I waited only until the gate closed before following. My shawl was draped around my shoulders, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear my own footsteps. The walk felt endless, every block stretching like a test of will. She turned left, as she always did now, heading into the neglected part of town where paint peeled from walls and weeds pushed through sidewalks. I hung back, ducking behind telephone poles, my breath shallow. At last, she disappeared into the narrow alley. The door at the end loomed, chipped paint curling at the edges, the number faded almost to nothing. This time I didn't stop. I walked straight to it, my knuckles rapping softly before I lost my courage. For a moment there was only silence, and then the door creaked open. She stood before me, my daughter-in-law, yet not. The same face, the same eyes, the same build, but her expression was different, fragile, and startled like a deer caught in headlights. Her hands twisted the edge of a rag, her knuckles white. My mouth went dry. "Elena?" I whispered, though my gut already knew the answer. She shook her head quickly, her voice trembling. "I'm not Elena. My name is Isabel." The ground seemed to tilt beneath me. My hands reached for the doorframe to steady myself. How is this possible?" I stammered. Isabel's eyes darted behind her, as though someone might overhear. "Please, come in, I'll explain." The room smelled of disinfectant and damp air. Its walls were stained, the floor cracked. In the corner, an elderly man lay coughing on a narrow cot, covered by a frayed blanket. Beside him, a woman with hair like snow stirred weakly, her eyes clouded but kind. Isabel gestured toward a chair. "Sit, please." My knees wobbled as I lowered myself, my eyes never leaving her face. The resemblance to Elena was uncanny, two reflections of the same mirror. Isabel's voice shook as she spoke. "I never wanted this. She found me years ago at the market. She said we looked alike, like sisters. She offered me money if I would take her place sometimes. She said all I had to do was simple things: pick up groceries, care for the boy, keep the house tidy so she could be free for a while. I didn't ask questions. I needed the money for my parents' medicine." She gestured toward the frail couple on the cot. "Every dollar she gave me paid for their care. I thought I was helping my family. I didn't realize I was hurting yours." Tears stung my eyes as her words sank in. Every inconsistency, every sudden mood change, every left-handed scribble, all of it now made sense. Isabel wasn't Elena, but she had worn her face like a mask. I wanted to rage at her, to demand why she had stepped into my life without permission. But looking at her trembling hands, her tear-filled eyes, I saw not malice but desperation. She was just another woman cornered by life, doing what she could to survive. Still, questions churned inside me. "Where does Elena go when you are here? Who is she with?" Isabel lowered her gaze. "I don't know everything. Once I waited in the car for her. She came out of a cafe with a man, tall, well-dressed, and older. I heard his name, Richard Collins. They were close, closer than a married woman should be." Her voice broke, and she pressed the rag to her face. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to tell you, but you deserve to know." The name was a blade in my chest. Michael had said she was with a man in the airport lounge, elegant and rich. Now Isabel gave him a name, turning my son's vague suspicions into cruel reality. I sat frozen, every breath a struggle, my mind flashing with Daniel's tired smile, Ethan's innocent eyes. How could Elena betray them so coldly? A chair scraped softly, and the elderly woman on the cot stirred. Her voice was frail but clear enough to pierce the fog in my head. "Isabel is not my blood. I took her in when she was a newborn. She was abandoned, left behind. I couldn't let her be lost." My gaze snapped to Isabel, who nodded with tears spilling down her cheeks. "I always wondered if Elena and I were more than just lookalikes," she whispered. "Now I think we might be sisters, twins. One kept, one discarded." The room spun. Twins. My daughter-in-law had deceived my family, but she had also deceived her own flesh and blood. I pressed my hand to my chest, choking back a sob. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about the woman my son had married, was unraveling like a loose thread tugged from a sweater. I rose from the chair on unsteady legs, my voice hoarse. "I don't blame you, Isabel. You were forced into this, but I need you to help me. I need the truth to come out for Daniel, for Ethan." Isabel clasped her hands together, her tears shining in the dim light. "I'll help you. I don't want to live like this anymore." I stepped back toward the door, my heart heavy, yet strangely steadier than it had been in weeks. The truth was ugly, but it was finally taking shape. I looked back at Isabel, seeing in her face both the betrayal that had shattered us and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, our family could find healing again. As I stepped out into the glaring sun, one thought pounded in my chest with every heartbeat. The woman living in my house was not who she claimed to be, and the time to confront her was drawing near. That night I barely slept, my mind trapped between relief and terror. Relief because the pieces finally fit, terror because the truth I carried could shatter my son's life. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the creak of the house settling in the dark, the faint whistle of wind through the old window frames. Isabel's face haunted me, so like Elena's, yet softer, gentler, full of shame and sorrow. Her words replayed again and again. "She pays me to pretend." She wanted freedom. "She's with a man named Richard Collins." My chest ached as though my heart had been split down the middle. At breakfast, Daniel sipped his coffee distractedly, his eyes shadowed from long hours at the construction site. Ethan chattered about school projects, waving his crayon-stained fingers as he described a rocket he had drawn. Elena sat at the head of the table, perfectly composed in a white blouse, her hair pinned neatly. She smiled when Daniel glanced her way, her voice lilting and calm, not a trace of the coldness I had seen the night before. Anyone else would have thought this was the picture of a happy family. But I saw the cracks beneath the paint. Every word from her lips felt rehearsed, every gesture too precise, as though she were acting in a play where the audience could never know the script. I wanted to scream, to slam my notebook onto the table and shout, "She isn't who you think she island." But then Ethan laughed, spilling orange juice down his shirt, and Daniel chuckled, reaching for a napkin to wipe his son's chin. The simple sweetness of that moment paralyzed me. If I spoke, I would destroy it. If I stayed silent, I was betraying them in another way. Later that morning, I slipped out to meet Linda at the diner. The bell over the door jingled as I entered, and the smell of strong coffee wrapped around me. She was already seated, her knitting needles clicking softly. "You look worse than yesterday," she said, studying my face. I sat down hard and told her everything, the words tumbling out in a rush, the alley, the peeling door, Isabel's confession, the name Richard Collins. Linda's needles stilled. "So you were right," she said quietly. "It's not your imagination. There really are two of them." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "But what do I do now? If I tell Daniel, I rip his family apart. If I don't, I let him live with a lie." Linda leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Evelyn, secrets are like poison. They seep into everything. Daniel will find out sooner or later. Better it comes from you, with love, than from the world with cruelty." Her words sank into me like stones. She was right, but my courage still faltered. That afternoon, Elena returned from errands carrying a bag of groceries. She set them on the counter and turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom, I picked up your favorite tea." She held out the box, her hand steady, her voice sweet. I took it, murmured thanks, but inside my mind raged. Was this Elena? Or was it Isabel? The thought gnawed at me until I could barely look her in the eye. After dinner, when Daniel took Ethan upstairs for his bath, Elena lingered in the kitchen. She stood by the sink, washing dishes with slow, deliberate movements. Then she glanced at me over her shoulder, her gaze sharp, piercing. "You've been quiet lately, Mom, writing in that notebook of yours. Is something wrong?" My breath caught. She had noticed. My notebook was hidden in the drawer under the table, but she must have seen me scribbling at night. I forced a smile, my voice shaky. "Just writing down recipes I don't want to forget." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought she would press further. But then she turned back to the dishes, her shoulders rigid. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I opened the notebook once more. I wrote, "Elena suspects I know. Time is running short. Must prepare Daniel. Must protect Ethan." My hand shook as I pressed the pen down, but I felt a strange calm as well. I was no longer drifting in confusion. The path was before me, however painful. The next day, I called Michael. His voice crackled through the line, weary but steady. "Mom, what's happening? You sound different." I took a deep breath. "Michael, you were right. There are two women. Elena has a twin, Isabel. She's been living a double life." Silence followed, heavy and shocked. Then Michael's voice hardened. "We can't let this continue. Daniel deserves to know. Ethan deserves to be safe." My throat tightened. "I know, but I need you here when I tell him. I can't do it alone. He promised to come home as soon as his schedule allowed." When I hung up, I stared at the photo wall again, my husband's smiling face captured in time, my sons as boys. I whispered into the quiet house, "Raphael, give me strength. Our family is about to break, and I have to hold it together." The clock ticked steadily, each beat pulling me closer to the confrontation I could no longer avoid. I knew then that the next family dinner would not be like any other. It would be the night everything changed. The following week moved like a storm cloud, creeping closer each day, heavy and inevitable. I tried to hold the house together with small rituals, folding Ethan's shirts into neat stacks, preparing Daniel's favorite stew, watering the flowers on the porch, but nothing silenced the pounding in my chest. Each time Elena drifted through a room, humming softly or adjusting a picture frame, I felt her eyes brush over me with quiet suspicion. She knew I was watching her. She knew I was writing everything down. The fragile politeness between us was like a cracked vase. One more touch and it would shatter. One afternoon, as I was kneeling in the garden pulling weeds, the crunch of tires on gravel made me look up. Michael's car rolled into the driveway, and he stepped out, his uniform jacket slung over one arm, his expression tight. He hugged me quickly, almost too tightly, as though trying to steady himself. "Mom," he whispered. I came as fast as I could. Relief washed through me, and I clutched his hand, pulling him inside before Elena could see us talking from the window. In the kitchen, Michael listened as I laid out the full truth. I told him about Isabel, about the alley and the peeling door, about the frail parents she was caring for, and about the name Richard Collins that now echoed like a curse in our home. Michael's jaw clenched with every detail. "So she's not just lying," he said finally. "She's living two lives. One with Daniel, one with this man." His eyes darkened. "We can't let her keep playing with Ethan's heart like this." I nodded, tears brimming. "But we can't just throw accusations. Daniel needs proof, and he needs us by his side when he hears it." That evening, Elena returned from an errand, her basket filled with bread and apples. She paused in the doorway when she saw Michael, her smile flickering just a little too fast. "Oh, Michael, what a surprise! Home so soon?" He nodded stiffly. Layover ended early. His tone was clipped, almost brittle. She set the basket down and began unloading it with practiced calm, but I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands fumbled slightly with the apples. She knew her time was running out. After dinner, when Daniel went upstairs with Ethan, Michael pulled me into the den. "We need to plan this carefully," he said in a low voice. "Confront her all at once, when Daniel is there, when she can't deny it. Bring Isabel too. Make her face the truth side by side." The idea sent a shiver through me, but it felt right. Only the stark contrast of the two women standing together could break the illusion. Only then would Daniel see what I already knew. The next day, I returned to the alley alone. Isabel answered the door almost immediately, her eyes wide with worry. "Mrs. Hayes," she whispered, using my name with a kind of fragile reverence. "Is everything all right?" I stepped inside, clutching my shawl. "Isabel, the time has come. I need you to come to the house. Michael is home, and we're going to confront Elena. Will you stand with us?" She hesitated, glancing at her frail parents on the cot, then back at me. Her lips trembled. "I'm scared. She'll hate me forever." I reached for her hand, gripping it firmly. "She already used you, child. She doesn't deserve your silence. My grandson deserves the truth. So does my son." Isabel's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I'll come." That evening, Michael helped me prepare the dining room. We laid out Daniel's favorite dishes, lit candles, and tried to make the table look warm and inviting. It felt almost cruel to dress the setting for what would become a battlefield, but I wanted the family to gather under the pretense of normalcy before the truth cracked everything open. As I arranged the plates, my hands shook so badly that Michael reached over and steadied them. "Mom," he said softly, "you're stronger than you think." Ugh. When the sun dipped low, Daniel arrived home, weary but smiling, his tie loosened. He looked at the table with surprise. "What's the occasion?" I forced a smile. "Just a family dinner. We haven't had one in a while." He kissed my cheek, and the guilt nearly drowned me. He had no idea his world was about to collapse. Ethan bounded in, excited about the candles, asking if it was someone's birthday. Elena appeared last, dressed elegantly in a pale blue dress, her hair cascading over her shoulders. She looked radiant, confident, too confident. As she slid into her chair, her gaze flicked from Michael to me, then lingered a heartbeat too long, as if daring us to speak. I sat down, my heart hammering. The plates clinked softly, the candle flames swayed. Ethan laughed. Daniel poured wine. Elena's smile never faltered. On the surface, we were a family enjoying supper together. But underneath, the storm was brewing. I could feel it pressing against my ribs, aching to break free. I lowered my fork, looked at Michael, then at Daniel. The words formed in my throat, heavy as stone. Tonight, the truth will be spoken. The table was set, the candles flickered, and every nerve in my body buzzed like a wire ready to snap. Daniel carved the roast, Ethan giggled at the way the steam fogged his glasses, and Elena leaned back in her chair with that serene smile she wore like a mask. Michael and I exchanged a glance, silent but certain. The moment was now. My hand trembled as I lifted my glass, my voice cutting through the soft clink of silverware. "Before we begin, there's something I need to say." Daniel paused, his fork halfway to his lips. "Mom, what's wrong?" Elena's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing. She sensed it, she always did. My voice shook, but I pressed forward. "For weeks I've been noticing things that don't make sense. Changes in moods, handwriting, even how you hold a spoon, Elena. And Michael," I looked at my younger son. He nodded grimly. Michael saw something too. Something no mother can ignore. Daniel's brows furrowed, confusion clouding his face. "What are you talking about?" Elena set her glass down hard enough to make it ring. "This is ridiculous. I've been here every day. Ask Ethan, ask Daniel." The sound of the front door opening made her freeze. Everyone turned as Isabel stepped timidly into the room, her dress plain, her hands knotted together. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Daniel's fork clattered onto his plate. Ethan gasped. "Why are there two moms?" he blurted, his little voice breaking the silence. Michael rose, steady as a stone. "This is Isabel. She's been pretending to be Elena at times, paid to cover her absence." Elena shot to her feet, her face drained of color. "How dare you bring her here?" Her voice cracked like a whip, sharp enough to make Ethan flinch. I stood too, gripping the back of my chair to keep steady. "No, Elena. How dare you? You've lied to us all. You've brought another woman into this home to live your life while you disappear to live another." Daniel's face was pale, his eyes darting between the two identical women. "Elena, Isabel, I don't understand." Isabel's voice wavered, but she stepped closer. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I never meant to hurt you. I only did what she asked. I needed the money to care for my parents. I never thought it would go this far." Tears shimmered on her cheeks as she turned to me. "She said it would only be for a little while. Just errands, just babysitting. But it never stopped." Elena's fists clenched, her voice rising, desperate and furious. "She's lying. She's jealous of me. Jealous that I have everything she doesn't. Why would you believe her over me?" Michael slammed a folder onto the table. Inside were the documents he had brought: flight records, copies of her electronic passport. "Because you can't be in two places at once, Elena. This shows you were in France on the same day Mom heard your voice here in this house. Which one were you then? The woman boarding a plane or the one singing Ethan to sleep?" Daniel grabbed the papers with shaking hands, scanning them, his lips moving as if he could will the truth away. "Elena, tell me this isn't real," he pleaded, his voice raw. Ethan clung to my arm, his wide eyes filled with tears. "Grandma, which mom is the real one?" His innocent question sliced through the room like a blade. Elena's face twisted, her calm finally breaking. "Fine," she shouted, her voice dripping with bitterness. "Yes, I left. Yes, I needed freedom. I was tired of playing the dutiful wife in this suffocating house. Richard gives me the life I deserve, a life with class, with money, not this." Her eyes burned into Daniel. "You and your endless hours, your little paychecks, you'll never give me what he can." The words detonated like a bomb. Daniel staggered back, his face crumpling. "So everything all these years you never loved me?" Elena sneered, her mask on. "I loved what you could give me, but it was never enough." Isabel's voice broke through, trembling but firm. "You didn't have to drag me into this. You didn't have to make me your shadow. We could have been sisters, Elena. But you used me like I was nothing." Elena's glare shot across the room, venomous. "You should have stayed hidden. You're nothing but a mistake I turned into an advantage." The room fell into stunned silence, the only sound Ethan's muffled sobs as he buried his face into my side. Daniel's hands curled into fists, his shoulders shaking. "Get out," he whispered, his voice low and dangerous. Elena blinked. "What?" His voice rose, thunderous. "Get out of my house. You've broken everything. You don't deserve to stay another minute under this roof." For the first time, Elena faltered, her bravado flickering. She looked at Ethan, but the boy turned his face away. She looked at me, but I only shook my head, my heart breaking for what she had done to all of us. Finally, With a sound between a scoff and a sob, she spun on her heel and stormed out, the slam of the front door echoing like a final verdict. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Daniel sank into his chair, the papers slipping from his hands. Ethan climbed into his lap, clutching his shirt, and Daniel wrapped his arms around his son, his tears finally falling. Michael placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, steadying him as best he could. Isabel stood frozen by the doorway, her face streaked with tears, guilt, and relief tangled in her eyes. I looked at them all, at the pieces of my family scattered across that room, and I knew this was only the beginning of the storm. But at least, finally, the lie had been torn into the open. The night after Elena left, the house was wrapped in silence so deep it pressed against the walls. No footsteps in the hallway, no humming from the kitchen, no laughter forced through clenched teeth. Only the occasional creak of wood and the faint sound of Ethan crying in his sleep. I sat in my armchair with the notebook on my lap, the pages filled with weeks of suspicion that had finally exploded into truth. Yet instead of relief, a hollow ache filled me. My son sat hunched on the couch across the room, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders heaving in silent grief. Michael stayed near him, a steady presence, but even he looked shaken. Isabel stood awkwardly near the door, unsure whether she belonged in this house at all. I looked at each of them, my heart breaking in 1,000 directions. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice trembling. He looked up, his eyes red, his face drawn. "How could she?" he rasped. "All these years, Mom. I thought we had something real. I worked late nights, every weekend, because I believed in us. And she," his voice cracked, "she was building a different life the whole time." He slammed his fist against his knee, then winced, the sound of his pain filling the room more loudly than the words themselves. Michael leaned forward. "She was living a lie, Dan. None of us saw it coming. None of us wanted to." Daniel shook his head. "You warned me, didn't you? You always said something was off." His voice softened, broken, and I defended her. Ethan stirred from his restless sleep upstairs, his whimper drifting down the staircase. Isabel's eyes filled with tears. "Let me," she whispered, moving quietly up the steps. We listened as her soft voice carried back down, soothing the boy, humming a lullaby I had taught her only days before. When Ethan finally settled, the house grew still again. Michael rubbed his forehead. "Mom, what now? Do we press charges? Do we track her down?" His tone was harsh, but beneath it I heard his fear. Fear for his brother, for his nephew, for the family that had just been split open. I shook my head. The law may not mend what she's broken. Right now, Daniel and Ethan need peace more than punishment. Let her run with her choices. She's already lost more than she knows. Daniel let out a long, shuddering breath, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Ethan asked me tonight if he'd done something wrong, if that's why his mom left. How do I answer that, Mom? How do I tell a 7-year-old his mother chose another man over him?" His voice cracked, and he buried his face again. I crossed the room and laid my hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremor in his body. "You tell him the truth he can bear, Daniel, that his mother was troubled, that she made mistakes, but that he is loved beyond measure. By you, by me, by Michael, and by Isabel, if she chooses to stay." At her name, Isabel reappeared on the stairs, her eyes red but her expression gentle. She had tucked Ethan back into bed, and for a moment, she looked so much like Elena it hurt to breathe. But unlike Elena, her face carried no mask, only raw honesty. Daniel looked at her, 100 emotions flickering across his face, grief, anger, confusion, and something else, something softer. Isabel lowered her gaze. "I'll go if you want me to. I never meant to hurt anyone." Daniel's voice was hoarse. "You didn't hurt me, she did. You were just caught in her game." He hesitated, then added, "And Ethan, he trusts you. He called for you tonight, not her." The words hung in the air, fragile and tentative, like the first rays of dawn after a long storm. Michael rose, placing a hand on my shoulder. "We'll rebuild. It won't be easy, but we'll get through it." His voice steadied me, though I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He had flown halfway across the world to stand in this kitchen, and now he was carrying us with his strength. I glanced around the room. Daniel's slumped form, Michael's determined gaze, Isabel's tear-streaked face, the faint sound of Ethan breathing upstairs. This was what was left of us, broken, battered, but still here. I thought of Raphael, my late husband, and the way he used to say that family is like glass, fragile, but when it shatters, you pick up the pieces and build something new, even if it cuts your hands. I whispered those words aloud now, my voice barely more than a breath. We'll build again. Daniel nodded slowly, his shoulders heavy but his eyes showing a flicker of resolve. For Ethan, he said, for all of us. The candles had long burned low, their wax puddling onto the tablecloth, but in that dim glow I saw something that hadn't been there before. Not joy, not yet, not peace, but the faint outline of hope, waiting for us to claim it. The days after Elena's departure unfolded like the slow thaw after a bitter winter. The house still carried her shadow, her perfume clung to curtains, her shoes remained by the door, and the silence at the dinner table often grew so heavy it felt like we were suffocating beneath it. Yet, in small ways, life began to shift. Daniel dragged himself to work each morning, his movements heavy but determined. Michael returned to his flights, though he called every evening to check in. And Isabel lingered at the edges of our lives, tentative, unsure if she truly belonged, yet drawn back again and again as if fate refused to let her slip away. One morning, Ethan padded into the kitchen with his favorite sketchbook tucked under his arm. He looked at me with wide eyes, shy but insistent. "Grandma, can Aunt Isabel help me draw?" The words slipped out naturally, Aunt, and though Isabel's face flushed, she didn't correct him. She sat beside him at the table, her hands gentle as she guided his small fingers across the page. Together they drew a bird with crooked wings, and Ethan giggled when she teased that it looked like it had too many feathers. For the first time in weeks, the sound of his laughter rang clear, unburdened. I stood by the stove, my eyes stinging, pretending to be occupied with the kettle so they wouldn't see my tears. Later that day, as I folded laundry in the living room, I overheard Daniel speaking softly to Isabel. His voice was cautious, as if each word weighed more than he could carry. "Ethan seems lighter when you're around." Isabel's answer came quietly. I never wanted to replace her. I only wanted him to feel safe. There was a pause, then Daniel murmured, "You've done more than that. You've given him back pieces of his childhood she tried to take." I dared not move, afraid even the rustle of fabric would shatter the fragile honesty passing between them. Still, pain lingered. At night, I sometimes heard Daniel pacing his room, his footsteps restless, his muffled sobs breaking through the walls. Once, I found him sitting at the dining table long after midnight, staring at the documents Michael had left, the evidence of Elena's betrayal. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow. "Mom, was it all a lie? Did she ever love me?" My heart clenched. I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. "She may have loved something about you, Daniel, but love that feeds only itself isn't real. What you gave her was real. Don't forget that." He didn't answer, but his grip on my hand tightened. Meanwhile, Isabel began weaving herself into the fabric of our days. She brought soup when Daniel came home, too tired to cook. She taught Ethan simple songs, her voice soft and trembling at first, but steadier as the boy's laughter encouraged her. One afternoon, I found them in the yard, Ethan chasing her with a toy airplane while she laughed, her hair tumbling loose. For a moment, the scene looked like any ordinary family at play, and I realized my heart was no longer clenched with suspicion but swelling with something closer to hope. Yet doubt still gnawed at me. Late one evening, as I washed the dishes, Isabel joined me quietly. She dried plates in silence before whispering, "Mrs. Hayes, do you think your son will ever forgive me for being part of her deception?" I set the dish down, turning to face her. Her eyes were wide, vulnerable, the same eyes that mirrored Elena's, but without the hard sheen. "Forgiveness takes time," I said gently. "But Daniel sees the truth now. He knows you were used. And he sees how you care for Ethan. That will matter more than you know." She nodded, tears brimming, and for the first time, I felt less like she was an intruder and more like she was a daughter I hadn't expected to find. On Sunday, we went to church as we always had, though the pew felt emptier without Elena at Daniel's side. People whispered, and some asked questions Daniel wasn't ready to answer. Isabel sat quietly beside Ethan, her hands folded, her face pale with the weight of eyes on her. But when the choir began, Ethan leaned against her shoulder, humming along, and the whispers seemed to fade. Afterward, as we walked home, Daniel carried Ethan on his shoulders, Isabel walking just behind. Neighbors glanced, some curious, some sympathetic. I held my head high, thinking, let them talk. They don't know what this family has endured or how hard we're trying to heal. That night, after Ethan was tucked into bed, Isabel helped me clear the dishes. Daniel sat at the table, his gaze heavy but softer than before. He looked at Isabel, then at me, and finally spoke. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing: Ethan needs stability. And Isabel, he already trusts you. His voice cracked, but there was no anger in it, only weary honesty. Isabel's eyes widened, her lips parting as though she might protest. But Daniel shook his head gently. Don't argue. Just stay. The words hung in the air like a fragile promise, unspoken but understood by all of us. We weren't a whole family yet, maybe never would be in the way I once dreamed. But piece by piece, something new was forming, tender and uncertain, like a sapling pushing through cracked soil. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the quiet rhythm of the house, I whispered into the darkness, Raphael, we're still standing. And maybe, just maybe, we'll be stronger than before. The weeks that followed felt like walking across a fragile bridge. Every step forward carried the fear it might collapse beneath us. Daniel moved through his days with a quiet determination, but the shadows under his eyes betrayed the nights he spent awake, wrestling with betrayal. He kept his conversations with Isabel brief, polite, but I noticed how often his gaze lingered on her when she read with Ethan or folded laundry with me. It wasn't longing yet, it was searching, as though he were trying to decide whether this woman, who wore his wife's face but carried a different heart, could be trusted with the pieces of his shattered world. One Saturday morning, Ethan came bounding down the stairs, clutching a drawing he had worked on in secret. Look, Dad, he cried, holding up a picture of 3 stick figures, Daniel, Isabel, and himself standing under a sun with crooked rays. Daniel stared at it, his throat working. That's us? Ethan nodded eagerly. Yeah, Mom doesn't live here anymore. But Aunt Isabel helps me, so this is my family now. The boy's innocence sliced through the silence, and Daniel's eyes shone as he pulled Ethan into a tight embrace. Isabel stood frozen at the edge of the room, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. That afternoon, Daniel asked me to walk with him to the park, while Isabel stayed with Ethan. We moved slowly down the path, the crunch of leaves underfoot, filling the spaces between words. Finally, he spoke. Mom, I don't know what to do with her. His voice was low, heavy. Part of me sees Elena every time I look at her face, and it makes me sick. But then she says something kind to Ethan, or she helps you with the house, and I feel peace. Like she belongs here in a way Elena never did. He stopped walking, raking his hand through his hair. Am I a fool for even thinking that? I placed my hand on his arm. You're not a fool, Daniel. You're a father, and you're a man who still believes in goodness. Isabel isn't Elena. She carries her own story, her own pain. Don't punish her for her sister's sins. But forgiveness is never simple. That night at church, whispers followed us like shadows. People glanced at Isabel, their eyes narrowing, their voices hushed. Isn't that the wife? Someone murmured. No, it's another one. A twin, can you believe it? The words stung even me, and I saw Isabel shrink under their gaze. Ethan, oblivious, tugged her hand and whispered, Sing louder, Aunt Isabel. She smiled at him, her voice soft but sure as she joined the hymn. Daniel sat stiffly in the pew, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting around as though daring anyone to say more. The next morning, I found him in the garage, mending Ethan's bicycle chain. His hands were steady, but his face was pale with strain. They're talking, Mom, he said without looking up. About me. About her. About how I should have known better. He slammed the wrench onto the workbench. I can't protect Ethan from their gossip. I can't even protect myself. I placed my hand on his shoulder. You can't control their tongues, Daniel, but you can control what happens inside this house. That's where Ethan learns what love looks like. His shoulders sagged, and he nodded reluctantly. Later that week, Isabel came into the kitchen carrying a tray of tea. She paused when she saw Daniel sitting at the table, his head in his hands. She set the tray down carefully, her voice trembling. "Daniel, I know I can never erase what Elena did. And I know seeing my face is a reminder of her. But please believe me, I am not her. I never wanted to hurt you. If you ask me to leave, I will. But I will still worry for Ethan every single day." Daniel lifted his head slowly, his eyes raw. For a long moment, he said nothing, only searched her face as though trying to separate every feature from the woman who had betrayed him. Finally, his voice came out hoarse. "I don't want you to leave. Not yet. Ethan needs you. And maybe I do too, though I don't know in what way." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words, but it was not hostile. It was something else, tentative and fragile, like the first green shoots pushing through soil after a harsh winter. Isabel's tears fell freely, but her smile trembled with relief. That night, when the house grew quiet, I sat with my notebook once again. This time, I didn't write about suspicions or betrayals. I wrote about hope. Daniel spoke to Isabel without anger. "Ethan calls her family. The wound is deep, but healing has begun." I closed the book with a heavy sigh, realizing that my role had shifted. No longer the detective scribbling evidence, I had become the witness of a rebirth. As I turned out the light, I whispered into the darkness, "Raphael, they're finding each other again. Slowly, painfully, but they are. Watch over them, my love. Help them see what I see, that even from betrayal, love can grow again." Chapter 13. Spring arrived with a rush of color, the dogwoods blooming pale pink in the yard, the grass finally bright after months of dull gray. From the outside, our home looked peaceful, but inside, the wounds still ached like half-healed scars. Daniel rose early each morning for work, his shoulders squared, his jaw tight. Isabel busied herself with Ethan, walking him to school, baking cookies in the afternoons, and humming lullabies at night. On the surface, these were ordinary days, but beneath them was an undercurrent. Neither of them spoke aloud, a quiet pull between grief and something new, something uncertain. One Saturday, Ethan tugged Daniel's sleeve. "Dad, can Aunt Isabel come with us to the park?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. At the park, I watched from a bench as Ethan ran ahead with his kite, Isabel jogging after him, laughing breathlessly when the string tangled in her hair. Daniel stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on them. I saw his expression soften in a way I hadn't seen in months. Later, as we packed up to leave, Ethan squeezed Isabel's hand. "You're the best, Aunt Izzy," he chirped, using a nickname he had invented. Isabel's face lit up with such warmth that for a moment, I thought I was looking at the family we could have been all along. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Daniel lingered in the kitchen while Isabel dried the last of the dishes. "You didn't have to run after him like that," he said quietly. "He tires everyone out." Isabel smiled faintly, her hand still on the towel. "I don't mind. His laugh makes the running worth it." Their eyes met, and for a breath too long, neither looked away. Then Daniel cleared his throat, muttered goodnight, and disappeared upstairs. Isabel stood rooted in place, her cheeks flushed, the towel still clutched in her hands. But hope never blooms without resistance. Gossip in town grew louder. At the grocery store, I overheard two women whispering near the produce stand. "That's Daniel Hayes's house, isn't it?" The wife ran off, and now the sister's taken her place. The words dripped with judgment, their voices sharp like knives. I pretended not to hear, but inside I burned. When I returned home, I found Isabel in the garden pulling weeds. Her face was pale, her eyes downcast. "They're talking about me, aren't they?" she asked softly without looking up. I knelt beside her, placing a hand over hers. "Let them talk. They don't know your heart. They don't know what you've carried." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "But Daniel hears them. He has to live with their stares. I don't want to make his burden heavier." That evening, Daniel came home later than usual, his face grim. He set his keys on the counter and poured himself a glass of water, his silence stretching long. Finally, he looked at Isabel, who was sitting at the table helping Ethan with math homework. "I heard what people are saying," he said flatly. Isabel's hands stilled on the page, her eyes wide. "I can leave," she whispered. "If it makes things easier for you, I'll go." Daniel's jaw tightened, his voice sharp with sudden intensity. "Number, you're not the problem. They are." Ethan looked between them, confused. "Dad?" Daniel softened his voice, reaching to ruffle his son's hair. "Finish your homework, champ." Later, when Ethan was asleep, Daniel found Isabel on the porch, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. He stood beside her, the cool night air pressing between them. "Don't talk about leaving again," he said, his tone gentler now. "Ethan needs you. And so do I, even if I'm still figuring out how." Isabel's breath hitched, and she turned toward him, eyes shining. "Daniel, I don't want to replace anyone. I just want to give back what I can. To you, to Ethan, to your mom. You've given me more of a family than I ever dreamed I'd have." His gaze softened, and for a long moment they stood together in silence, the moonlight spilling across the porch. I watched from the kitchen window, my heart heavy yet hopeful. I saw the distance between them shrinking, the invisible lines drawing them closer. They weren't ready to admit it yet, maybe not even to themselves, but something was growing there. Something fragile, tentative, but real. The next morning, Ethan burst into my room, his hair wild, his smile wide. "Grandma, guess what? Aunt Izzy said she'll come to my school play. She's gonna clap the loudest." His joy was so pure that I laughed, despite the ache in my chest. Isabel's place in his heart was no longer tentative, it was secure. The question now was whether Daniel would allow her a place in his as well. That evening, as the three of them sat on the couch, Daniel reading a newspaper, Ethan curled against Isabel's side, I realized that family wasn't always about blood or vows. Sometimes it was about who stayed when the storm hit, who held you up when you couldn't stand alone. Elena had torn us apart, but Isabel, in her quiet, steadfast way, was helping stitch us back together. And though the whispers in town still stung, inside these walls a different truth was beginning to take shape. By early summer, the rhythm of our lives had shifted into something unrecognizable, yet strangely steady. Elena's absence was no longer a raw wound. It had become a scar we carried, tender but healing. Daniel rose each morning with clearer eyes, the exhaustion of heartbreak giving way to a quiet determination. Ethan bounded through the house with his usual joy, calling for Aunt Izzy whenever he needed help tying his shoes, finishing homework, or simply laughing at his own silly jokes. And Isabel, no longer a guest hovering at the edges, had woven herself into the fabric of our days like a thread we hadn't known was missing until it held everything together. But beneath the peace, a question lingered, unspoken yet ever present. What would become of Daniel and Isabel? They moved around each other with a care that was almost painful to watch. When Daniel came home from work, she greeted him with dinner on the stove and a softness in her eyes, but she always kept a careful distance. He, in turn, offered thanks, his voice warm but cautious, as if afraid any misstep would topple the fragile balance they had built. One evening, Ethan performed his school play. He wore a paper crown, his cheeks flushed with excitement, his small voice carrying across the auditorium as he declared himself king of the forest. When the performance ended, Isabel clapped the loudest, her hands red from the force of her applause. Daniel's eyes caught hers across the crowded room, and for a moment, their shared smile was unguarded, bright with pride. On the ride home, Ethan fell asleep in the back seat, the crown tilted over his eyes. Daniel glanced at Isabel, his voice low. "He's happiest when you're around." She turned toward him, her lips trembling. "He's your son, Daniel. You're the one he looks up to." Daniel shook his head. "He looks at you like you're his safe place, and maybe you are." The words hung between them like fragile glass, too delicate to touch. That night, after Ethan was tucked into bed, I found Isabel sitting on the porch steps, staring into the dark. She jumped when I sat beside her, brushing at her eyes quickly. "I shouldn't feel this way," she whispered. "Not after everything. People already judge me enough. But sometimes I think—" Her voice broke. "Sometimes I think I could love him." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Love isn't something you choose, Isabel. It grows where it's nurtured. And Daniel, he sees you. He may fight it, but he does." Days later, Daniel finally broke his silence. We were in the kitchen, Isabel rinsing dishes, Daniel leaning against the counter with his arms folded. His voice was rough when he spoke. "I've been trying to ignore it, to keep things simple for Ethan, but I can't anymore. Isabel froze, her hands trembling as she set down a plate. Daniel's eyes burned into hers. You've been there for him in ways Elena never was. You've been there for me, even when you didn't have to be. And I don't know what that means for us. But I know it means something. Isabel's breath caught. Daniel, are you sure? Or are you just trying to fill the emptiness she left? His jaw tightened. I'm sure. Because when I look at you, I don't see her anymore. I see you. And I don't want to lose that. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, I don't want to lose this either. For a long moment, the only sound was the steady hum of the refrigerator, the world holding its breath around them. Then Daniel stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, tentative but real. I watched from the doorway, my heart aching with both fear and joy. They weren't declaring anything yet, but the truth was no longer hidden. They had chosen to face it. Of course, the world outside wasn't so kind. The next Sunday, as we left church, a woman muttered loudly enough for us to hear, already replacing the wife. How shameless. Daniel stiffened, his fists clenching, but Isabel touched his arm lightly. Don't, she murmured. They don't know us. Ethan, holding her other hand, looked up with wide eyes. Why are they mean, Dad? Daniel knelt, his voice steady though his face burned. Because sometimes people don't understand. But we do, and that's what matters. That evening, Daniel gathered us around the dining table. His face was pale but resolute. I need to say this out loud, he began. Ethan and we want Isabel to stay. Not just for now. For good. My heart leapt, and Ethan clapped his hands, grinning. Isabel pressed her palms to her mouth, tears spilling freely. Daniel reached for her hand, his voice firm. You're part of this family. Not because you replaced anyone, but because you chose us. And we choose you. The room filled with silence. Not heavy this time, but sacred. I felt Raphael's absence like a shadow, yet also his presence like a blessing. I could almost hear his voice reminding me, family is what you build, not just what you're given. That night, as I wrote in my notebook, I no longer recorded suspicions or contradictions. I wrote a single line. From ashes, we have built something new. A year passed, and the seasons stitched themselves together into a quilt of quiet, steady days. The sharp edges of grief had softened, leaving only faint lines where pain once lived. Our house, once weighed down by suspicion and sorrow, now hummed with laughter again. Ethan grew taller, his voice brighter, his questions endless. He no longer asked where his mother had gone. Instead, he spoke of the future school projects, baseball games, the dreams only a child could hold with such certainty. Daniel walked with a straighter back these days, the shadows beneath his eyes replaced by something gentler. And Isabel, no longer hovering at the margins of our lives, stood firmly at the center, her presence like a lamp in the window on a stormy night. The wedding was small, just family, a few close friends, and a scattering of wildflowers arranged by Ethan himself. Daniel's hands shook as he slid the ring onto Isabel's finger, not from doubt but from the weight of what they had endured to stand together. When they kissed, Ethan cheered the loudest, crowning himself ring-bearer and best man all in one. I sat in the front row, tears blurring my vision, but they were not tears of loss. They were tears of gratitude for second chances, for the courage to face the truth, for the love that had risen from betrayal's ashes. Life moved forward, but memories of Elena never vanished completely. Her name was still written in photo albums, her face smiling back from pictures Ethan sometimes flipped through. When he asked questions, Daniel answered carefully, not with anger but with honesty. She made choices that hurt us, he would say, but she gave me you, and that's the best gift anyone could give. Ethan nodded each time, satisfied with the answer, his little heart carrying no bitterness. For me, the greatest comfort was seeing how Isabel transformed our house. She brought warmth to the simplest things, fresh bread cooling on the counter, lullabies sung softly at bedtime, gentle laughter filling the kitchen as Ethan told his tall tales. She never tried to erase what had happened. Instead, she built something new atop the ruins, something stronger, kinder, and undeniably ours. One evening, as the sun melted into gold across the horizon, I sat on the porch with my old notebook in my lap. The pages were no longer filled with trembling notes of suspicion, but with moments worth remembering: Ethan's first home run, Daniel's smile returning, Isabel teaching us her mother's soup recipe. At the back of the book, I wrote a single line: "Truth breaks us open, but love puts us back together." I closed the notebook then, not because the story was over, but because it no longer needed to be recorded in fear. It was living around me, every day, in the sound of a child's laughter and the sight of my son's renewed hope. Sometimes, I still wonder what might have been if Elena had chosen differently, if secrets had never crept into our home, but I've come to see that even the hardest truths can carve paths to unexpected blessings. Without them, Isabel might never have stepped into our lives the way she did, and Daniel and Ethan might never have found the peace they now hold. Perhaps life doesn't always give us the story we imagine, but it gives us the one we're strong enough to carry. As I watched the stars pierce the night sky that evening, I thought of everyone who has walked through betrayal, through doubt, through the kind of pain that feels unbearable in the moment. To anyone listening now, know that the storm will pass. The truth may shake your world, but it can also set you free. And sometimes, when you least expect it, love will return to your doorstep in a form you never could have predicted. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story touched your heart, I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a truth that broke your world, only to find strength and hope on the other side? And if you want to hear more stories like this, tales of resilience, of family, of the power of truth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means we can keep shining a light on stories that matter, stories that might just help someone else find their way. Because in the end, every story is more than just words. It's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone.